Thank you, Mary. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Mary Michaels, our treasurer, and Mary tells me that she's also the unofficial, or the official joke teller for some of the other nonprofits that she's in, so we might get her to do that for us sometime. So thank you guys for being here this evening, and this is part one of a two-part thing. You know, for the first section of this event tonight, we will be talking about digital portfolios, and for the second, you'll get to actually have feedback given to you about your resumes. And so let's start for just a second here. Let's everybody shake it out. Everybody relax. All right. And you know, I tried to use the who, what, where, when, why format. Some of you guys probably are wondering, who is this fellow? Who is this guy? Who are you, Ben? And how did he come to be here? How is it that Ben was able to become the featured you know, spokesperson on this particular subject? So why don't you tell us a bit about you?
An entirely valid question. I run a business here in New York which helps other organizations to build user experience teams. But actually, I know Gloria through the UXPA. So back in London, I was very heavily involved with UXPA. We actually do a fairly similar event to this, not the same, but similar. And I helped organize that a couple of years in a row. And I just run various user experience portfolio workshops, I do sessions publicly, one-on-one, and just every day in my job.
All right. So just hold the microphone just a little closer there.
Yeah, like this.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. All right. So let's talk about the. So we have this UXPA connection that actually we didn't even know we had. I didn't know you were doing similar stuff to this type of event. So it was kismet, I guess. So let's talk about the what. Let's talk about the term UX portfolio, user experience digital portfolio. And I think the word portfolio, it conjures up a lot of imagery that I think people have trouble getting around. So what exactly is a user experience portfolio?
I think that's the first stage of confusion, is in the semantics. So if you think about the term portfolio, you think about visual design, you think about finished product. That's really the first thing to get out of your head if you're putting together a portfolio as a UX designer. It's more about, you're trying to create a visual narrative of the way that you work and what your process is. So if you think about, you know, telling a story about the way that you think, which sounds like an existential nightmare, but
the way you think.
Yeah, exactly. But you illustrate that story with assets and documentation from your projects, and that's really what you're trying to do.
Okay. So where would a person actually think about putting such a portfolio? This is a very abstract concept, and what makes sense to give it to someone to locate?
Yeah, so, I mean, my opinion, and this is kind of shared by the majority of my clients, is that just do a PDF. I mean, it's the most universally accessible document. You'll access it on your mobile, your tablet, or web. You can protect it, so you can put it behind a password protection system. It's not just publicly accessible. You then control who's getting it and where you're sending it. And as you're trying to create a narrative around the way that you work, with a PDF you can do that because you're controlling the flow. So as opposed to a URL or an online portfolio where somebody can just jump around. So for reasons of security and control, I'd say go with a PDF.
So it's not necessarily, so people shouldn't assume that just because they don't have a portfolio website set up that they can't deliver a portfolio.
No, and yeah, I wouldn't know. You should have a portfolio regardless of whether you have an online URL. People are going to Google you first of all. I mean, so it makes sense to have a web presence. And if you put your portfolio on your website, then great. But it doesn't make sense to have it just publicly accessible and available to anybody. So yeah, you should definitely have a PDF.
So there's a difference between a web presence and an actual portfolio.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. That's a good distinction to make. So the purpose then, the actual purpose, you said, to illustrate the way you think.
Yes. So I think this is another kind of area of confusion and fear. If you're thinking about doing a portfolio for the first time, then you think, how can I encapsulate all my experience, all my projects, all my thinking into a single document, which is, you're never going to do it. You'll just sit there and never do anything. So the best thing to do is to think about it from a user-centered design perspective. I think, who is this document for? It is for you in kind of a self-analytical, understand my own skill set kind of a way, but it's really for clients and hiring managers. So when you start thinking, who is this for? What are they going to be using it for? What are going to be the conditions of use, and what do they need to have at the end of it? that should then inform the way that you put it together. So really, the purpose is that a client can look at this document and get an overview of the way that you think, the way that you approach projects, what processes you've used on projects. And it's an indicator of how you're going to produce documentation for them, because they're going to look at this document and say, this is how this person puts together documentation, this is how this person communicates what they want to communicate. So if your portfolio is badly thought out, or badly designed, or badly constructed, then the assumption is going to be that the documentation you create for them is going to be badly thought out, and badly designed, and badly constructed.
Right, so, and it should not necessarily just consist of a list of bullet points that you think they're looking for.
No, and this is, I mean, that idea of tailoring it to your audience, I mean, it's thinking about who your audience are, but it's not misrepresenting yourself in the process. That's key.
All right, so let's talk more about the what, then, of what should go into a portfolio. Okay, so we've talked about, say, all right, where it should live, who the audience is. Now let's talk about what should actually be in it. Yes. What are you looking for?
Yeah. So, you know, as we discussed, if you're trying to illustrate your process and all the different ways that you've used the tools and techniques that you have at your disposal, then don't just fill your portfolio full of wireframes. I mean, if you ask most UX practitioners what the biggest challenge is, or one of the biggest challenges that they have, it's the misunderstanding that what they do is just produce wireframes for people. So if you're filling your portfolio full of just wireframes or late-stage assets, then you're propagating that myth that that's what you do in your job. So you need to put everything in there. You need to keep everything for a start. So you need to be taking photographs of everything that you do along the process of a project. So if you're running workshops, or you're doing whiteboarding exercises, or you're sketching stuff out with clients, or doing user testing, or card sorting exercises, take photographs so you can prove that you did these things. And you can then put those in the portfolio to create this narrative. And keep all your sketches if you are sketching. If you're not, if you're iterating digitally, then try and find a way of keeping the early iterations, so at least you can show how you developed an idea and you developed a design. But you keep everything so that you can create this narrative. Otherwise, you're really just telling the end of the story, which isn't speaking to you as a UX designer.
And that's a big difference between what I think, you know, people who came up in art school or, you know, in the traditional advertising agency model. We tended to think that a portfolio is the black case that you drop off that must have beautifully produced, look at that vibration thing, that must be perfectly produced, camera-ready art. And that's a huge difference, actually, from the UX portfolio, right? Where it's actually the sketchier and the dirtier and the messier it is, the more. Yeah. And people should get used to using their iPhones or their cameras. Yeah,
I mean, you have a camera in your pocket all the time, so there's no reason you can't kind of document these things. But it's not, you know, the document itself can be pretty without the assets that you're showing being traditionally pretty. And there's, you know, there's elegance and there's aesthetics. If you're making a not traditionally attractive application for a bank or an internal enterprise system, there's still an element of aesthetic pleasure in creating an elegant solution. So getting it out of your head that it has to be a fully, high fidelity comp or something very visually appealing is the first thing to do. That's not the goal.
So the pixel perfect wireframes?
Include them, but then show how you got there.
Okay.
And show what informed pushing the pixel in the first place.
Got it. So we're going to talk for a second about the myths and the misconceptions about user experience portfolios, and one of them has to do with privacy. So the big question that we get a lot is, what about NDAs? Non-disclosures. I work on stuff that I'm not allowed to show, so how am I supposed to demonstrate what I do? Okay, so valid argument or any more, or no?
It's tough to really comment on this with so many clients in the room. I mean, everybody has NDAs with their clients. Everybody has NDAs with their designers. Everybody's making IP for somebody. It's sensitive material, but at the same time, if you can't show any of your work as a designer, then how do you prove that you did what you say you can do? It's like saying, I can do all this stuff, look at my resume. Can we see it? No, just trust me, I'm really good at all these things that I say I can do. So it's difficult. I think the first thing to say is speak to your manager. You have to, if you're gonna find a workaround to this, then speak to your manager and impress upon them the importance that you need to show some of the stuff that you've been doing. There are some common solutions that some managers agree to. One is debrand all the work. Take anything which relates to the to the client or the brand of. So it's just about showing what you did and how you did and what the process was. Don't have a public URL, which we kind of already said. You know, if you're just putting all your assets and all the IP that you've created up on a website that anybody can look at, anybody can take assets from there or copy ideas, that's kind of crazy to do that. So protect it, first of all. If you're in banking, which is, you know, some of the scariest some of the scariest NDAs that you can ever see, then, you know, maybe you can show stuff in person. I mean, if you can't leave stuff, you can't send stuff digitally, you know, that's pretty obvious. And most clients are understanding, if you're coming from banking, that you probably can't send them stuff to look at, but surely you can show them stuff. You can take something in with you, debrand it, make it very anonymous, and talk them through the process.
So it's, I think, Vinicio, where are you? I think you and I had this conversation, that actually it becomes more about, I think that people hiring managers are less interested in, you know, what secrets they can learn from your portfolio as much as they just want to know what problem you solved, I think, right? You know, that's at the heart of it. Tell us what the problem was and how you solved it.
Right. I mean, most hiring managers are busy. You know, they're running projects, and they're hiring somebody because they're too busy. So the idea that they're hiring somebody to steal IP from them, or that they have the time to really remember all the design ideas they saw or the people that they met that week is you know, it's just not realistic. And there's a mutual sharing of sensitive information when you go and speak to a company about potentially being employed by them. They're showing you projects, they're showing you process, they're giving you an insight into them as an organization, which generally people on the street wouldn't get. So there's a mutual kind of sharing of sensitive information going on. There's a mutual kind of bond of trust.
All right, so what happens if you don't have a lot
of document?
Mm-hmm.
So I guess there'd be a couple of instances where you might not have much to show. One would be, I guess, either you're quite junior as a UX designer, or you're a graduate, or you're transitioning. So you just literally, you don't have documentation because you haven't done anything yet in terms of practical commercial projects. The answer would be just to do some, to make some, which is a bit of an oversimplification. But there's no reason that you can't set yourself a project on a Friday to redesign an app or a website that you like, or to come up with something completely new and original, and follow the process that you presumably know because you either studied or you've been reading, or because you know you want to get into UX, and so follow that process and make the documentation over the weekend, follow all the steps, keep it, so at least you can show that you've practically applied the process, albeit not commercially, but you know most graduates haven't done the same thing either. So the short answer is make some, and if you're a bit more seasoned and experienced and you haven't got the documentation because you just didn't keep it, which is a real shame, which is something that I hear a lot. So that people keep the late stage stuff, but they don't keep the sketches, they never took photographs. You can reverse engineer some of that stuff. You can create some sketches again off the back of the high fidelity stuff that you happen to keep. You can redo the lower fidelity, you know, wireframes. And if it's not dishonest because you did them before, and really you're filling in the gaps in the process. You can even grab photographs of workshops off the internet because you've done them. It's just a case of, here is something visual to display what I did.
Got it. So it's not necessarily that the portfolio police are going to come knocking on your door.
No.
And bust you for, that's not you in the picture.
Also, how could it be you in the picture? I mean, so it's never really going to be.
And I think
it's
about
supposed to be a workshop and you know a whiteboard and a sketch. So I mean, yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. And if you genuinely feel terribly, terribly dishonest doing that, then you can admit it in your portfolio.
Well, I think that this actually appeals to how many people here like documentaries on TV? Documentary TV, you know, I think there's very few of us that don't. What I think that people are probably fail to realize is that there's enough drama going on in our own personal lives around the average project. I sometimes wish that I was filming a documentary, sometimes of a UPA event, you know, that if you actually were to take snapshots of your whole journey on one project along the way, and all the different pitfalls and the challenges and the zigs and the zags that occurred on that project, that you right there would have a very compelling case study,
right,
you know, to be able to show somebody. You know, and I don't think people are looking for perfection. I think they're looking for how you deal with stress in the absence of perfection.
Yeah, exactly. And I think with creating this narrative, it's not about the documentation looking perfect either. It's just about saying, I started here, and then I did this, and I got there. Then we did this, and I got there, and this is where we ended up. It's saying, this is where we ended up, look, and letting somebody else try and reverse engineer your thinking off the back of that. It's not saying very much. It's not really applying good UX principles to the document itself.
But it is telling an honest story. Let's go back to the NDAs for just a second. Do you think that that's actually a valid excuse anymore then, you know, to these days? You know, do you accept that as a, well, you know, how far does that get a person in an interview?
Yeah, I think it's valid by virtue of it being legal, you know, a legal contract. So yeah, it's valid because you can be taken to court. So yeah, it's valid and you might go to prison. But I think in terms of the sympathy within the industry, there's less. I mean, almost all of my clients, with the exception of some who actually have the reverse opinion, we'll discuss that in a second, most of my clients will say, we're just not sympathetic to this anymore. If you can't show us anything, then how are we ever going to know what you do and how you did it? You're just telling us, basically, that you can do this stuff. Some will set design challenges or, you know, design briefs to get that information. That's one way around it. But that's already a late stage in the process. The portfolio is really, you send your portfolio, you send your resume, you have somebody explaining what you do on your behalf, and that's how a client or a hiring manager makes a decision. So if all you can do is send a resume, it just makes the case tougher. Because if you're being submitted alongside 5 people who have got portfolios, whether or not the work is nicer or better, you can just see the work. So it puts you at a huge disadvantage. So it is valid, but it's becoming...
So you might be completely ethical, but lose
right,
to the guy who's like, I'm going to bend a rule. Okay, so...
I mean, if you're working for yourself and you did it and you want to take on your own legal exposure, my attitude is knock yourself out, and then the hiring person can decide that if somebody owns a consulting firm who's got far shallower pockets than the companies that we sign very, very significant legal documents with, anybody that walked into our office and showed us anything that was branded or anything that had not been released yet or anything that revealed some kind of a UX element that could be perceived as offering competitive differentiation or competitive advantage. I wouldn't care if they were God unannounced. They'd be out the door.
But I think that actually underscores the point that is you demonstrate that you're taking the steps to protect. Hello? That you debrand or just don't use the original content from that at all, but still be able to sketch out your problem-solving process. I think that that's fair.
I think
there's 2 things you can do. One is, if you present it with a client, a case study in a public forum, that's a great way to market yourself. We will often reference when we worked with Starwood in 2004, but those were all publicly accessible in the public domain.
Right.
There's that plus make up your own project.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. There are definitely ways around it. And just, you know, to speak to your point of, that was the flip side of the equation I was going to mention, is I do have clients who say, if we meet somebody and they show us sensitive material, then we're not going to hire them because they're going to
Right, what's to stop you from doing that with us? Yeah.
But the caveat to that is the thing we said at the beginning, which is speak to your line manager, but impress upon them the fact that you need to be able to show something. I think if this is about the spirit of an agreement rather than the letter of the agreement. If you say to your line manager, what does my contract say? They're going to say, you can't show anything ever, don't even think about it. If you have a conversation with them along the lines of, that puts me in a difficult position, how can I actually prove what I do for a living, and how can I get a job if I ever, God forbid, leave? Then there may be ways around it. You may say, okay, well look, debrand your stuff, protect it, don't put it anywhere public, and then you can do that.
So you've seen managers that will agree to this?
I've seen practitioners who I presume their managers agreed to.
Okay, got it. Fair enough. Okay, so then we talked about like whether or not if you know maybe you don't have a lot to show and you can take steps to work on to take on additional projects on your own initiative to actually demonstrate your thinking. How about in terms of volume? How long should a portfolio be to get your point across?
So, I mean, it's similar to the how long is a piece of string question, but you use your judgments. In the same way that you're thinking about this document, not only from your perspective, what do I want to make and what do I want to say, you're also thinking, who is this for, how are they going to be using it, how much time do they have, and what do they need to see? So, I guess the key thing is just not to be repetitious. If you've done 10 very similar projects and you've delivered very similar assets on those projects, then maybe don't necessarily show all 10 of those assets. Just show one of them to say, this is, I did this, and I can do similar things. So each page should really be saying something about you or your process, or displaying a different tool or a technique or a different portion of a project. And each page should be doing something different, essentially. I don't know, as a rough guide, just from things that I see, if you're sort of 2-3 years experience, you've got a few projects under your belt, 10 to 15 pages is a pretty average size that I would see. If you're a bit more senior and you've got a lot more projects, 15 to 20 pages is pretty common. Anything above 25 has to be justifiable, but there are exceptions. I mean, if it reads well and it's a good narrative and each page is saying something different, then 35 pages isn't out of the question. And if it's done well, people will take the time to go through it and to absorb what you're trying to tell.
Oh, that gets into length, and we'll actually have an example that you provided of a portfolio that you think exemplifies, that's a good example that you wanted to share with the audience. And Freddie, where are you? We'll need the screen down for that part in just a few. So okay, so then I guess that kind of helps a person decide what to, you have to be a ruthless editor, I think, then, right? You can take your best example, but don't put 10 of the same types of example. You're going to max out your the attention span of your consumer. So what I'd like to do now is, some of you probably received in the early stage of registration, we actually circulated a brief survey to take some questions from the audience about the things that they would like to see see you talk about. And we got some questions from people at varying stages in their career. And I'd like to talk about 2 or 3 of them. So one would be for people who are in transition. People who are, like, say, they're coders or developers, or they are QA people or something, and they're trying to make the break into the user experience. Do we have any folks who are trying to make a transition? How many people would you say? That's a pretty decent amount, yeah.
What are you, just out of interest, what are you making a transition from? How many from dev?
Got it.
How many from visual design? Oh, wow. Combination, of course. Yeah.
Uh-oh. Did we lose it? Do you want to use mine?
I can shout really loud.
Use mine.
So the question was, what if you're making a transition? Okay, so if you're making a transition from another skill set entirely, then it's hard, because how do you prove that you can do this stuff? You've got enthusiasm because you're making this transition, you're talking to somebody about making this transition. But that's not really enough for somebody to hire you into a position. They need to know that the investment they make is going to be worthwhile. I think the very minimum you have to do is to understand the UCD process from a theoretical perspective incredibly well. And there really isn't any excuse not to do that. Every UX person these days is an author. Everybody has a blog. Everybody, expresses their different perspective on what good user experience design is. So if you're genuinely trying to make this transition, then there's no reason you shouldn't invest the time in reading about how to make that transition and what the process is. So then you're in a position where, okay, I understand the process theoretically. I understand a few different perspectives on what good UX design is and what a good UCD process is. Then you come back to the earlier point we made, which is you can do projects over the weekend. You can set yourself, a design brief to complete in your own time. Suddenly you have a solid theoretical understanding of UX, and you have some assets that you can show from a project that you undertook, which is basically the same position that most pure HCI graduates are in when they come out of Carnegie Mellon or wherever they come from. So yeah, that's kind of a minimum. Know the process theoretically and do some projects.
And I think that's what you had also mentioned, that that levels the playing field, that if you can demonstrate that you understand the principles and have taken the time to actually work through them in practice, that that person who is making a transition is no less qualified for consideration as your HCI grad.
Arguably, they're in a stronger position because they have done this under their own volition. They've shown enthusiasm and drive to do this stuff in their own time whilst probably having a full-time job doing something else.
Right. All right, so we've talked about those who are in transition, and arguably that could be a topic unto itself. We could have a whole night, I think, just talking about that. There's a lot more to it, so we're just going to touch on that here. The next audience segment, I think that that we wanted to talk to is someone that's a type that's near and dear to Tammy's heart. Tammy, I see you there. UX researchers, per se. Yeah. So if you are, the question was if you're a user experience researcher and your outputs have mainly been presentations and recommendations, what do you put in your portfolio?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think it depends what type of researcher you are. So if you're purely doing quant data collection analysis and your outputs are written recommendations, then you can absolutely make a case for not needing a portfolio. But if you're doing more than that, if you're running workshops, if you're doing heuristic analyses and expert reviews, and you're running user testing, and you're maybe doing card sorting exercises, any of those things, then the same thing applies. You can take photographs and you can document that you do these things. If your outputs then, most of the time researchers' outputs are for stakeholders, at varying levels of seniority within a business and of varying skill sets. They need to see different things. So often that distillation process of, okay, this is the research, this is the data, this is how we distilled it, this is what we found. Now I need to figure out a way to make this interesting to somebody who doesn't know the nuances of what I do. That's your process. It's the activities that you do, and it's how you turn the outputs of those activities into things that are either visual or translatable or understandable within a business. So you can do the same thing. Photographs, snippets of documentation, sections of presentations that you give to stakeholders. All those things can help you create a portfolio. It won't be the same. It won't be the same kind of portfolio, but it shouldn't be because you don't do the same thing. So again, it depends on the tenets of your role. So it's true to say that it is a bit depressing. If somebody says, if an organization says, I want to hire a director, or I want to hire a VP or an SVP or whatever, and you go, okay, fine, and you introduce them to somebody, and they go, oh, they look great, where's all the wireframes? And you just think, okay, they don't necessarily understand what a director is supposed to be doing, and do they actually need one? So that is true. It's harder to have, you won't have the same type of portfolio. But it's rare that at whatever level you are, that you're going to be completely hands-off in a creative process. It's true that you're going to be doing more, internal production process definition. You're going to be hiring and managing a team. You're going to be doing internal evangelization. You're going to be representing user experience as a skill set within the organization and externally. Some of those things have documentation, some of them don't. But you're probably still going to be doing something on projects, even if it's defining strategy and concept with stakeholders or clients, or sketching stuff out to create the direction of a project. If you're then overseeing the detailed design of the assets with your team, you're then an arbiter for that stuff. You're the point of sign-off. You're hanging over their shoulder occasionally saying, why don't you put that there instead of there? So you can still claim some ownership over the outputs. So you can still put that together. It's not going to be the same kind of portfolio that a practitioner would have, where it's a very granular, iterative process where you're showing, iterations from one point to the next. It's going to be a bit more of a holistic. This is a project that I led on, and these are the concepts that I created, and these are the assets that were created by my team. And you have words at your disposal. You can annotate your portfolio to explain these things. So you can do it. Not everybody needs one. It shouldn't just be full of, just assets. It's going to be different. Yeah, exactly.
I think that was one quote that you had said, that you are more than a collection of wireframes, which struck me so much that I actually used it as the email blast. I think so many people get frustrated with being asked to produce, or just send over some wireframes and you're through the HR level of the interview. Like, that's disappointing, you know. And then you find out when they're hiring is for a user experience person. What they're really looking for is like a wireframer.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Some companies are looking for wireframers. I guess that's the point, and that's where that process tells you something about the company that you're speaking to.
Yeah.
If they say where are the wireframes, we could care less about this other stuff. You know what kind of role
this comes back to whether or not about the fact that you have to interview the company as hard as they're interviewing you, right?
Almost harder, because the supply and demand situation of user experience practitioners, you know, is always weighted in favor of the practitioners, in the sense that there are far more roles in companies that want you than there are practitioners to go around. But every company has a different understanding of what it is and how to integrate it and how to use it on a project, and a different set of challenges and obstacles. And most of these things are out of your control as a practitioner. Once you join a company, there's only so much you can do to change these things for your benefit. So it's as much about you interviewing the company that you're thinking about joining or speaking to as it is the other way around. And things like that are a great indicator. The questions that they're asking you, the things they're asking to see, that's a pretty good indicator of what they see UX as within their organization.
Oh, that's a good point. All right, so actually we're going to have a run through. We're going to wrap up in like 3 minutes, but let me just rip through this, and if there's time, we'll grab a couple questions, because I want to stay on. I want to give everybody the time that they need for the review part. But we have mistakes to avoid.
Yep.
But before we go to mistakes to avoid, how long do you honestly spend looking at a portfolio before you can make a decision?
You answer first.
I know your answer.
Okay.
Rude, be honest. This crowd needs to hear it.
Okay, I mean, caveating it massively before I give an answer is that I have to see a lot. On average, 30 to 45 seconds, which is going to make a lot of people angry, I'm sure. The caveat to that also is that if it's really good...
That's really generous.
Then you spend more... I lied slightly, it's 25. I lied slightly. But if it's really good, you spend much longer on it.
Okay, cool. So 25 seconds if you actually have nothing else on your calendar that day. All right, I think I heard someone else say 10 to 15 seconds. It can range. Basically, your portfolio needs to be doing its job within seconds.
You do spend more time. This is the caveat, is that you spend more time on it if it's really well put together.
Gotcha.
Genuinely
gotcha.
you do.
Okay, that's an inverse relationship.
Absolutely.
Interesting. Okay, so the 6 things to avoid. Then, I think we can rip through this fairly quickly.
Yes, and I guess we've spoken about most of these, but these are just specific common things that I hear from clients that they don't like.
Yeah.
One is, obviously we've said, not only showing late stage assets, don't just show the pretty stuff, show the other stuff. People want to see thinking. The other one is I see less of, but still see every now and again, which is people that just send you say, okay, you look interesting, can I see some examples of your work? And they send you a URL to a site that they worked on, which is
like, here's my site. New York Times.
It's not even there. Yeah, exactly. It's not even their site. It's crazy. So don't do that. Never using any text in a portfolio to add context to what people are looking at. So filling in the gaps of the assets that maybe you couldn't include. Use some text, not text heavy obviously, but some to sort of give some context to what you're looking at. Sending links to folder systems. This really annoys me. I don't know why it annoys me a lot.
Go find it. I'm sending you a link to a folder system.
Right, and then
it's in there somewhere.
You open it, and then you open a folder, and then you have to open the wireframe, and then look at the wireframe, and then close the wireframe, and go back into the parent folder, and then open the next folder, and then open the next wireframe, and then look at that. And it's just really lazy, and it's kind of annoying. And it's outsourcing the construction of that narrative to the viewer when you should be doing that stuff. So that's one of those things. And just if it's really, really, really poorly designed. I mean, not veering towards the visual designer comparison again, but the very basic fundamentals of good document design, like good use of white space, good typography, good formatting. You can apply those. You can read those anywhere online and apply those to the document.
You don't need to be an art school major to have some good design skills.
Not in any way.
All right, that's good. All right, so what we have here on screen now is an example of that Ben was able to provide for us of what you believe is a decent portfolio.
Yes, this is mine, and if you want to hire me for projects, this is a guy that I know really well. So obviously he's given me access to it, and said that he doesn't mind us using it as an example of a good portfolio. And it kind of encapsulates some of the things that we've mentioned tonight. So he starts with a profile and a summary. This is me. This is who I am, and he's taking a photograph. As we go through, try and spot how many pages are late-stage assets or wireframes. if we can go through. Okay, so this is, he actually chooses to break his portfolio down into areas of his skill set. You can do project case study, that's one common way to do it. Another is to outline the different portions of your process, and this is what he chooses to do. So he begins with, this is clever, it's a table of contents, in the same way that when you go to an academic book, you kind of know what's in there because it's been laid out for you in the first page. So he's got a table of contents and an explanation of the different things that he can do, and then he proves it by showing photographs of stuff that he has done. So, right, exactly. And it's not, you know, then I think they're really pretty to look at, but if you were thinking about it from a visual design perspective, then maybe you wouldn't include them. This is a whole bunch of competitor analysis, which is how do you put competitor analysis in a portfolio? This is how you do it. You just stick it in such a, in such a high volume that it gives a good indication of what you do. Requirements doc. Who would ever put a requirements doc in a portfolio? But it's important because he's explaining the things that he does at the beginning of a project. Click, click, click. This is where it jumps 5 screens. Oh, yeah. And it's the end, well done. It's not going any further.
Uh-oh. Hey, Freddie, do you think we could just advance it?
There we go. Okay, we'll run through these really quickly. So he's done research and he's shown examples of research. Then he moves on to concepting. Again, there we go, I didn't even press it. He has a table of contents, says what he does. Now he's got pictures of his sketches and his whiteboarding. As we said, you should include low fidelity stuff, showing his thinking. Now he moves on to
balsamic markups. Anybody use balsamic? Yeah.
You can spot it a mile off. And then we get into the detailed design. So this is where he would, this is where most people's portfolios start. They show all the detailed design work, and this is literally 2 pages, I think, of his portfolio. Is look at me, I can do high fidelity wireframes on web and mobile. You don't need to see 50 examples.
Here's your pretty wireframes, here's your pretty wireframes.
There you go, and that's a kind of a summary and a synopsis at the end. But he runs through the process. I mean, you can see how he thinks. You can see the tools that he's got at his disposal and in his repertoire, and you can kind of understand that he knows how to choose these tools and techniques based on the project that he's working on.
What's interesting is that this is 29. I see 29 down here, but it didn't feel like it.
Right.
It doesn't feel like 29 pages of hell.
Yeah, it was only 15. I kind of edited. sorry to say that. It's true.
Was that the last page?
We took it. There was a lot of there's other stuff that he has in there, but yeah, we picked the meat.
Got it. All right. So I think that pretty much was the fast version of what we wanted to cover for you guys regarding the topic of digital portfolios. And Ben is going to be one of the resume reviewers. He's going to be one of the resume reviewers, but you'll also be available, I think, to take individual questions if you want to hang out after the event. So I would encourage you to talk to him after the event is over, because at this point, I guess what we should do is officially conclude the discussion and start part 2 of the event. Are you guys ready? Okay, then I would like to give a big round of applause to Ben.